NATO announces 35 billion euros aid package for Ukraine. Trump demands lower oil prices and calls for immediate drilling. And Kalas says Hormuz closure by Iran is extremely dangerous. You're watching Q News. This is the Economic Bulletin, and I'm Henny Saif. We'll start off with the United States, where the National Association of Realtors has reported that the existing home sales unexpectedly rose 0.8% in May to an annual rate of 4.03 million units. Despite the monthly gain, the housing market remains weak, with sales down 0.7% year-on-year, and marking the slowest May since 2009. Persistently high mortgage rates, near 7%, influenced by the Federal Reserve's proposed rate cuts, are cited as the main drag. Inventories surged 20.3% year-over-year, while the median home prices hit a record $422,800 for May. Meanwhile, builder sentiment plummeted in June with more cutting prices. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has announced a 35 billion euro aid package for Ukraine, emphasizing efforts to restore peace and end the Russian conflict. He stated that air defense capabilities would increase fivefold and identified Russia as the alliance's most significant direct threat. Rutte outlined a defense investment plan requiring members to allocate 5% of GDP to defense and indicated that Spain must invest 3.5% to meet these targets while opposing Iran's nuclear aspirations.
With our close partners, including Ukraine, the European Union.
Reuters has reported that Germany plans to significantly increase its defense spending to 3.5% of economic output by 2029, funded by a nearly 400 billion euro borrowing program. This move aims to send a strong signal ahead of this week's NATO summit. After meeting NATO's 2% target only in 2024, this new push is also designed to stimulate Germany's stagnant economy. The comprehensive budget details, including record investments, are set for cabinet approval on Tuesday. Moving on to Asia, Foreign Ministry spokesman Guo Jikun has announced that Chinese Premier Li Keqiang will attend the 16th annual meeting of the New Champions, or Summit Davos, in Tianjin from June 24th to the 25th. The meeting will host over 1,700 participants, including political, business, academic and media leaders from more than 90 countries and regions. Jia emphasized that the record number of participants underscores a shared commitment to upholding economic globalization and the free trade system amidst global challenges like anemic growth and rising unilateralism and protectionism. He expressed hope that the meeting would inject greater stability and certainty into the global economy. A trade official has confirmed that the World Trade Organization has granted China's request for the establishment of a dispute settlement panel to examine Canadian tariffs. This move formally advances a trade dispute where China is challenging certain duties imposed by Canada on Chinese products. The establishment of a panel is a standard step in the World Trade Organization's dispute settlement process when consultations between member countries fail to resolve a trade disagreement. Japanese Prime Minister Shigeru Ishiba has emphasized the necessity of strengthening Japan's defense budget. However, he indicated that the focus should be on meeting strategic needs rather than adhering to a specific numerical target. His comments followed media reports that the U.S. administration, led by President Donald Trump, was urging its Asian allies, including Japan, to dedicate 5% of their GDP to defense. Ishiba conveyed that prioritizing a percentage of GDP for the defense budget was not the preferred approach. However, he also acknowledged the natural importance of coordinating defense spending plans with the United States as a key ally. South Korean President Lee Jae-myung has described the Middle East situation as very urgent and warned that financial markets are growing increasingly unstable amid rising uncertainty. In a high-level meeting, Lee urged government ministries to establish an emergency response system, especially to protect South Korean citizens in the region. He also called for swift action to manage risks to foreign exchange, financial and capital markets to prevent further economic disruption. In Africa, the National Treasury has announced that South Africa signed a $1.5 billion loan agreement with the World Bank, aimed at overhauling its transport and energy infrastructure and reigniting economic growth. The nation has struggled with growth for over a decade due to persistent power blackouts and crumbling transport networks. The government hopes this new financing will alleviate transport bottlenecks and enhance energy security. This 16-year loan carries more favorable terms than commercial borrowing, including a 3-year grace period, which should help limit rising debt service costs. Official data has revealed that Singapore's core consumer inflation rose 0.6% year-on-year in May, matching forecasts. This is the 5th consecutive month where the annual core rate was below 1%. Headline inflation also matched expectations at 0.8% annually. Despite this subdued inflation, economists are monitoring upside risks from Middle East tensions that could drive up oil prices. President Donald Trump has issued a forceful directive on oil prices via his Truth Social platform, publicly demanding that energy producers keep costs down and explicitly calling for immediate action from the Department of Energy. He urged stakeholders to ensure oil prices remained low, indicating his close observation of the market and cautioning against any actions that might inadvertently benefit unnamed adversaries. Furthermore, Trump issued a direct appeal to the Department of Energy, advocating for an immediate and substantial increase in domestic drilling operations. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has said that the potential closure of the Strait of Hormuz by Iran would be extremely dangerous and not good for anybody. Kallas emphasized the huge concerns over retaliation and the risk of the conflict escalating. Kallas also noted ongoing EU discussions on the broader Middle East situation, including relations with Israel. Iran's parliament reportedly supports closing the strategic waterway, but the country's Supreme National Security Council must still make a final decision. The Strait of Hormuz is a critical choke point through which about 20% of the world's oil and gas supply passes.
So ministers are very much focused on.
China has called for calm after Iran's parliament approved a move to close the Strait of Hormuz, warning that regional instability could threaten global trade and economic growth. The Foreign Ministry spokesman Wu Jiakun said that the Persian Gulf and surrounding waters are vital channels for international trade and energy transport. He added that maintaining security and stability in the region serves the common interests of the international community. He urged all sides to de-escalate. The final decision on the strait's closure lies with Iran's Supreme National Security Council. With oil prices surging and fears mounting over Iran's threats to shut the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for nearly a fifth of the world's oil supply, we now turn to Mr. Amir Shobeki, the economic expert in global energy markets. We'll explore what this means for oil, inflation, and the wider economy. Welcome to the Qnews Economic Bulletin, Mr. Shobeki. Sir, how much would the closing of Strait of Hormuz affect the global oil supply, the prices, and key exporters, and for how long?
The closure of Hormuz, if it happens, will be the last pressuring card for Iran, will have a significant impact on the global markets, and definitely it will stop 6.5 billion barrels from daily needs. It will stop 1/5 of the oil production and 40% of the maritime exports supply. Of course, this percentage cannot be compensated, and the results will be catastrophic, as the oil prices will soar to $130 and maybe more with the airstrikes in the Red Sea region by the Houthis, and the impacts will affect the Gulf states and the major exporters such as China, which exports half of its needs from the Arab Gulf region, and Iran as well will be affected by the inability to import its oil. Iran has the potential. They have 6,000 steam mines, and some entities and parties are escalating already, and the Iranian retaliation is now waited because the delay of this response helped to preserve the oil prices as is for now. The Iranian parliament as well approved of closing the Hormuz Strait and requested the executive entities, the relevant entities, to close the strait. I think this will be economic suicide for Iran and a challenge for the international community, for the Arab states, and for allies such as China and the European
Yes.
Union and NATO. And the United States as well, of course, will have a decisive response in this case.
Mr. Shobeki, you've mentioned that the prices could surge beyond $100, maybe even $130. So how fast would these rising oil prices ripple through to the consumers and inflation worldwide?
For sure, we will witness a lot of price fluctuations for oil prices. If we don't, if this period is prolonged, we will have more catastrophic impacts as states will start to use the strategic reserves, and they will lose a big portion of these strategic reserves, which will mean that the strategic reserves around the globe will be reduced, and this will cause more inflations and more surges in oil prices. But as I have mentioned, the United States and the United Nations will not allow this, even though this is a very possible scenario if Iran targets the US bases in the region.
Do you expect certain economic sectors or certain industries to be affected in 2025, as it will probably affect the global growth?
All sectors will be impacted. The air transportation and tourism will be highly impacted due to high ticket prices, and this will lead to reducing the growth expectations for the tourism sectors, and this will also have an impact on the sea transportation prices, and indirect increases will start with the inflation rates. We will see high inflation rates, and this will confuse the financial policy makers around the globe, whether the Federal Reserves or the central banks in all states, as President Trump will be the most impacted with his tariff plans due to the increased prices of oils, and this will lead to high interest rates if the conflict is prolonged and the navigation in Hormuz is affected. This will include all sectors, the entire globe. No one will be isolated from the impacts of the closure of such a vital strait.
Sir, China and India are some of the main major importers of oil. How will they adapt their energy strategies?
Such event preventing 30 to 40% of the oil prices. Of course, this will have major implications similar to what happened in 1973 when the OPEC and the Arab states withhold selling oil to the world. There will be paralysis. India and China, of course, have major strategic reserves, but this cannot be guaranteed as China does not disclose how much reserves do they have. but this will lead to high oil prices and very negative implications, and there are no alternatives to cover such shortage in production and exporting.
From our men, that was the economist and specialist in oil and energy affairs, Mr. Amir Shubeki. Thank you very much, sir, for your insights. Back to our news. Oil prices fell 1% on Monday after touching a 5-month high as markets tried to gauge the impact on transit of oil and gas via the Strait of Hormuz after U.S. airstrikes against Iran at the weekend. Brent crude futures were down 0.9% at $76.31 a barrel. U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude fell 1% to $73.09. Earlier in the session, Brent and West Texas Intermediate touched 5-month highs of $81.4 and $78.4 respectively, before seesawing between positive and negative territory throughout the European trading session. Gold prices nudged higher on Monday as escalating Iran-Israel tensions outweighed pressure from a stronger dollar, with markets closely watching Iran's next move. Spot gold was up 0.2% at $3,375.79 an ounce. U.S. gold futures gained 0.2% at $3,391.7. The U.S. dollar index rose 0.5% as stronger U.S. currency makes gold less affordable for other currency holders. Morgan Stanley strategists have reported that the market sell-offs from geopolitical events like recent U.S. strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities typically tend to be brief. While initial Brent crude price hikes of up to 5.7% were largely paired on Monday, strategists emphasized that sustained market volatility hinges on oil prices. Morgan Stanley's analysis of past geopolitical events shows the S&P 500 up an average of 2%, 3%, and 9% at 1, 3, and 12 months post-event, respectively. Morgan Stanley estimates oil would need to hit $120 a barrel to pose a significant threat to the business cycle, causing a major stagflationary shock or a 10 to 20% market correction. In markets, global shares posted a mixed performance on Monday, with gains in U.S. markets contrasted by declines across much of the U.S. and Asia. In the U.S., S&P 500 rose by 0.46%. The Dow Jones hiked 0.25%, and Nasdaq futures went up by 0.55%. In Europe, the markets experienced red tradings, with the UK's FTSE 100 slightly declining 0.21%. France's CAC 40 going down 0.63%, and Germany's DAX declining 0.25%. Meanwhile, in Asia, Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index went up 0.67%, and the Shanghai Composite Index rose by 0.65%, while Japan's Nikkei 225 saw a slight decline of 0.13%. The Egyptian presidency has announced that Egypt aims to reduce the external debt of its budget authorities by $1 billion to $2 billion annually as part of a fiscal discipline plan for the 2024-2025 fiscal year. The decision follows a successful tax facilitation initiative that yielded 54.76 billion Egyptian pounds in additional declared taxes and contributed to a large primary surplus and reduced overall deficit, with tax revenues up 36%. The government is also progressing with reforms under its IMF program, with President Sisi emphasizing continued fiscal discipline and measures to attract investment and boost production. An Iranian Parliament Speaker, Mohammad Baqir Qalibaf, announced that the legislature is considering a bill to suspend cooperation with the UN nuclear watchdog. Iranian media also reported that this move, confirmed by the Parliament's Presidium member, Rouhallah Mutafaqirzadeh, on Monday, comes as Tehran seeks objective guarantees of professional behavior from the International Atomic Energy Agency. Qalibaf stated that the International Atomic Energy Agency has not fulfilled any of its obligations and has become a political tool, though he reiterated that Iran is not looking to develop nuclear weapons. That brings us to the end of our economic bulletin for now, but here are the main stories we've been covering. NATO announces €35 billion aid package for Ukraine. Trump demands lower oil prices and calls for immediate drilling. And Kala says Hormuz closure by Iran is extremely dangerous. These are all the economic news we have for now, but please don't forget to follow Q News on YouTube, Facebook, X, Instagram and TikTok at Q News EGY to stay informed. Thank you for watching and stay tuned for more updates coming up here on Q News.